What if the biggest story of draft night was never about arm strength, footwork, or playbook mastery? What if it was about comfort? About control? About who gets to walk into a room with confidence, and who gets punished for it? Because when the cameras stopped flashing and the picks were announced, one name carried more weight than a draft position ever could: Shedeur Sanders. And the conversation surrounding him wasn't just about football. It was about power, perception, identity, and the invisible rules that still shape the most important position in sports. Let's be clear from the start. When people say, "That's racist," others rush to dismiss it. They argue that it's political. They say it's exaggerated. They say it's about performance. But the more precise question isn't whether something is openly racist. The real question is whether it carries racial undertones shaped by decades of tradition, expectation, and selective comfort. There's a difference between overt discrimination and systemic discomfort. And sometimes that discomfort is far more subtle and far more powerful. Because here's what makes this conversation complicated. The dynamics don't just exist between conservatives and liberals. They don't exist only in obvious spaces. Racial expectations can show up anywhere, even among people who claim to be progressive. There is often an unspoken standard for how a young black athlete is supposed to behave. There's an expectation of humility, of gratitude, of visible hunger, of struggle, of survival. When that script isn't followed, tension rises. And that's where Shedeur Sanders enters the picture. He didn't walk into draft meetings as a desperate underdog. He didn't arrive with a story of financial hardship. He wasn't trying to escape poverty. He wasn't looking for salvation through football. He walked in as the son of Deion Sanders, one of the most electrifying figures the sport has ever seen. He walked in having already earned millions through nil deals before throwing a single professional pass. He walked in polished, media-trained, brand-aware, and financially secure. And that changes everything. Because historically, the NFL has been more comfortable when its quarterbacks fit a certain mold. The quarterback has always been more than just a position. He is the face of the franchise, the corporate spokesperson, the extension of ownership, the embodiment of leadership. For decades, the prototype was quiet, composed, system-dependent, and carefully packaged. That prototype is evolving. The league has seen dynamic, athletic black quarterbacks rise to dominance. The narrative has shifted. But evolution doesn't erase deeply rooted perceptions overnight. Shedeur doesn't present himself as someone grateful just to be there. He presents himself as someone who belongs there. That subtle difference carries enormous weight. When a white quarterback enters the room with swagger, it's labeled competitive fire. It's called moxie. It's praised as leadership. But when Shedeur does it, some call it arrogance. Some call it attitude. Some quietly question whether he's coachable. And that's where perception becomes the playground of bias. No general manager is going to admit they're uncomfortable with confidence. They'll talk about mechanics. They'll mention scheme fit. They'll reference intangibles. But intangibles are often where interpretation lives. If Shedeur speaks confidently in a meeting, is that leadership or ego? If he understands branding, is that business intelligence or distraction? If he negotiates from strength, is that maturity or defiance? The answer often says more about the evaluator than the evaluated. History gives us perspective. When John Elway used baseball leverage to influence his draft position, it was framed as strategic brilliance. When Eli Manning refused to play for the team that drafted him, it was seen as calculated and smart. When Baker Mayfield displayed fiery confidence, it was marketed as passion. When Johnny Manziel partied in the spotlight, teams still bet on his upside. So why does Shedeur's confidence spark discomfort? That's the question that sits at the center of this debate. Some analysts have hinted at something deeper. They've suggested that the league isn't fully accustomed to a privileged black quarterback who doesn't need football to survive. That's a different dynamic. That shifts leverage. Because the NFL, structurally, is built on control. Rookie contracts are slotted. Franchise tags exist. Team control is embedded into the framework. Ownership, 32 billionaires, ultimately shapes the power structure. And when a young quarterback walks in financially independent, media-savvy, and self-assured, the balance of power subtly shifts. That shift can make traditional systems uncomfortable. Author William C. Roden once examined how power dynamics in professional football mirror broader societal structures. Whether one agrees with every comparison or not, it's impossible to ignore that ownership remains overwhelmingly traditional in background and perspective. A confident, brand-aware, empowered black quarterback challenges old expectations. And Shedeur represents a new archetype. He grew up watching his father, prime time, dominate both on and off the field. Deion never waited for permission to shine. He was bold, flamboyant, unapologetic, elite. That DNA doesn't disappear. Shedeur's confidence isn't manufactured. It's inherited. It's cultivated. It's reinforced by preparation and performance. On the field, his resume shows resilience. He stood tall behind unstable offensive lines. He absorbed hits. He delivered accurate throws under pressure. He elevated programs. He brought national attention wherever he played. The tape shows grit. The numbers show production. The leadership shows in how teammates respond. Yet the narrative repeatedly circles back to character. When criticism focuses more on demeanor than decision-making, you have to ask why. This doesn't mean every draft slide is discrimination. Football decisions are complex. Schemes matter. Evaluations differ. But when personality becomes louder than performance in the conversation, perception deserves scrutiny. Inside draft rooms, discussions often shift subtly. A scout might say, franchise traits. Another voice might respond, but what about the attention? Someone else might ask, are we ready for that spotlight? Suddenly, the debate moves from ability to optics. Optics are subjective, and subjectivity is where bias quietly operates. But here's the truth about the NFL. Winning changes everything. Confidence is controversial until it produces victories. Then it becomes aura. Swagger becomes leadership. Brand awareness becomes marketability. The same executives who worry about attitude will celebrate charisma once touchdowns pile up. We've seen this cycle before. The draft narrative can transform into motivation. Doubt becomes fuel. Elite competitors remember every slight, every headline, every anonymous quote. That memory sharpens them. It doesn't weaken them. The most dangerous version of Shedeur Sanders might be the one carrying a chip on his shoulder. And let's not overlook the business dimension. Today's quarterback isn't just a play caller. He's a content hub, a social media force, a brand ambassador. Shedeur understands engagement. He connects with younger audiences. He represents relevance. In a league competing for cultural attention that matters. Passing on that isn't just about football. It's about market impact. There's also a generational shift happening. Modern athletes don't rely solely on traditional media to define them. They speak directly to fans. They control their narratives. They build platforms before contracts. That independence can feel disruptive to systems accustomed to controlling communication. But the league cannot move backward. The quarterback prototype is expanding. Athleticism, charisma, cultural fluency, business intelligence. Shedeur embodies this era seamlessly. So the real question isn't whether he can throw the football. The tape answers that. The deeper question is whether the league is fully comfortable with the type of quarterback he represents. Was the draft conversation purely about football? Or was it partially about comfort? Those are two different discussions. In 3 years, this debate may look very different. If Shedeur succeeds, if skill meets opportunity and belief meets execution, the narrative will flip. Analysts who questioned his demeanor will praise his poise. Executives who hesitated will call him a franchise cornerstone. Because when talent meets confidence, the result can be explosive. And that's what makes this story bigger than a single draft night. It's about evolution. About how empowerment gets interpreted. About whether leadership must fit a single cultural template. About whether confidence in a black quarterback is still measured differently. The NFL is unforgiving. Talent must translate. Performance decides. None of this guarantees success. But it reframes the conversation. Did the league underestimate a player? Or did it misinterpret a presence? Time will answer that. What we do know is this. The quarterback position has always carried political, cultural, and symbolic weight. And Shedeur Sanders is stepping into that weight without shrinking himself to make others comfortable. That alone is significant. The next chapter hasn't been written yet. The touchdowns haven't been thrown. The wins haven't been stacked. But the storyline is already compelling, because it forces a deeper examination of perception versus performance. And if history teaches us anything, it's that confidence questioned today often becomes celebrated tomorrow. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe teams evaluated him strictly on football ability? Or do you think comfort, optics, and perception played a role? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation is far from over. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want more powerful breakdowns that go beyond the surface headlines, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves real sports conversations. And most importantly, comment your perspective. because your voice matters here. The story doesn't end at draft night. In many ways, that was just the opening chapter. Because once the cameras fade and the jerseys are handed out, reality begins. And reality in the NFL is unforgiving. It doesn't care about narratives. It doesn't care about debates. It only responds to performance. But even performance exists inside a framework shaped by opportunity, trust, and timing. And that's where the next phase of Shedeur Sanders' journey becomes even more fascinating. When a quarterback enters the league, he doesn't just compete against opposing defenses. He competes against expectations. If he was drafted high, the expectation is immediate transformation. If he slid in the draft, the expectation becomes validation or confirmation. Every throw becomes evidence. Every mistake becomes a headline. Every win becomes a statement. For Shedeur, the spotlight won't dim, it will intensify. Because now the question shifts from, was he evaluated fairly? To, can he prove them wrong? And that's a different type of pressure. The NFL doesn't hand out sympathy. It hands out film. Defensive coordinators study tendencies. Blitz packages test composure. Veteran defenders test confidence. This is where preparation meets reality. And if there's one thing that has followed Shedeur throughout his career, it's preparation. Those who have watched him closely describe him as obsessive about film. Detail-oriented. Calculated. He doesn't just rely on natural ability. He studies. He absorbs. He adjusts. That's not arrogance. That's discipline. But discipline doesn't generate headlines. Personality does. So the narrative continues to orbit around who he is instead of what he does. Yet once the season begins, results start speaking louder than reputation. Imagine this scenario. Early in his rookie season, he steps into a hostile environment. The crowd is loud. The pass rush is relentless. The pocket collapses. And instead of panicking, he stands tall. He delivers a strike on 3rd and long. The drive continues. The team scores. Suddenly, the same analysts who questioned whether he was too flashy start praising his composure. That's how quickly perception can flip. Confidence becomes calm under pressure. Swagger becomes command. Brand awareness becomes star power. And here's the truth many overlook. Quarterbacks don't just need talent. They need belief. They need an organization willing to stand behind them when adversity hits. Development in the NFL isn't linear. There will be interceptions. There will be tough losses. There will be moments where doubt resurfaces. The real test won't be whether Shedeur makes mistakes. Every young quarterback does. The test will be how the organization responds when he does. Do they double down on their faith? Or do they retreat into caution? Because the quarterbacks who thrive are usually those backed by conviction. Look at how patience shaped careers. Look at how systems were built around strengths. The league has slowly begun recognizing that empowerment unlocks performance. When quarterbacks feel ownership of the offense, when they are trusted to lead rather than merely execute, growth accelerates. Shedeur's style suggests he won't shrink himself to fit a system that limits him. Instead, he'll aim to master it, and then elevate it. There's also the generational reality. Today's locker rooms are different. Younger players respect authenticity. They connect with confidence that feels real. They gravitate toward leaders who don't pretend to be someone else. Shedeur's upbringing under Deion Sanders exposed him to media scrutiny early. He understands cameras. He understands criticism. He understands narrative control. That matters in today's NFL, where every throw is dissected on social media within seconds. But beyond media and marketing, the most important battleground remains between the lines. Defensive coordinators won't care about brand value. They'll care about decision-making speed. They'll test his ability to read disguised coverages. They'll send pressure from unexpected angles. They'll challenge his poise in tight windows. That's where quarterbacks separate themselves. And here's what often defines greatness: short memory. If Shedeur throws an interception, can he come back on the next drive and attack the same window? If he takes a sack, can he reset and command the huddle with authority? That psychological resilience is what transforms potential into production. Those who question his mentality might soon realize that confidence is actually insulation. It protects against doubt. It stabilizes during chaos. There's also the broader cultural layer unfolding simultaneously. The NFL is navigating a new era of athlete empowerment. Players understand leverage more than ever. They understand branding, contracts, and public voice. Shedeur represents that evolution fully formed. He doesn't see himself solely as an employee of a franchise. He sees himself as a partner in its growth. That mindset can unsettle traditional hierarchies. but it can also energize a franchise seeking relevance. If he begins stacking wins, the marketing machine will amplify him instantly. Jersey sales, primetime games, national endorsements. The same attributes once labeled distracting will become assets. And that's where the irony lives. Sometimes, the league attempts to humble what it later celebrates. History has shown this pattern repeatedly. Confidence is often scrutinized before it's validated. Once validated, it becomes mythologized. The narrative doesn't just change, it reverses. 3 seasons from now, imagine analysts revisiting this draft. Imagine the redraft articles. Imagine the segments debating which teams miscalculated. The conversation may no longer center on demeanor. It may center on opportunity missed. Because in professional sports, misjudging personality can be just as costly as misjudging talent. There's also something deeper unfolding, a shift in how leadership is defined. For decades, leadership in quarterbacks was framed narrowly. It emphasized quiet authority, controlled emotion, and system-first identity. But modern leadership can look different. It can be expressive. It can be vocal. It can be unapologetic. Shedeur embodies that shift. He doesn't separate confidence from leadership. He integrates them. And that integration forces observers to confront their own definitions. Is leadership about conformity? Or is it about influence? Does humility require silence? Or can it coexist with self-assurance? Those philosophical questions sit beneath the surface of football debates. Meanwhile, inside the huddle, none of that matters if teammates believe. Quarterbacks earn trust through action, through accountability, through delivering in critical moments, through taking hits and standing up again. Shedeur's collegiate journey demonstrated toughness. He absorbed punishment and kept competing. He carried programs that lacked stability. He embraced pressure rather than avoided it. That resilience suggests he won't be overwhelmed by professional adversity. But the NFL accelerates everything. Speed increases. Windows shrink. Mistakes multiply. Growth becomes urgent. This is where coaching alignment becomes critical. If his coaching staff leans into his strengths, quick processing, poise under fire, confidence in big moments, development could surge. If they attempt to reshape him entirely, friction may arise. The best organizations adapt to talent rather than forcing talent into rigid molds. And that adaptation could determine whether his story becomes a cautionary tale or a breakthrough narrative. The next 3 years will be defining. Not just for Shedeur but for the league's evolving identity. Because if he succeeds, if he thrives while remaining fully himself, he sets a precedent. He normalizes a new archetype. A financially secure, brand-aware, empowered black quarterback who doesn't apologize for belonging. That image could ripple beyond one franchise. Young athletes watching will internalize that blueprint. They'll see that confidence doesn't require reduction. That authenticity doesn't require compromise. And that's why this story carries weight beyond statistics. It represents friction between tradition and transformation, between comfort and evolution, between perception and proof. Ultimately, the NFL remains a results-driven machine. Touchdowns quiet critics. Wins silence doubt. Playoff runs reshape narratives. And if Shedeur begins delivering those results, the early discourse will feel distant. But the memory of it will remain. Because stories like this reveal more than scouting reports. They reveal societal reflexes. They expose how we interpret confidence differently depending on context. The next time he walks into a stadium tunnel, cameras flashing, expectations rising, remember this moment. Remember the debates. Remember the phrases like, too confident. Because if success follows, those words will age poorly. And if adversity hits, the scrutiny will intensify. That's the dual reality of stardom. For now, the stage is set. The league has made its evaluation. The opportunity has been granted. The doubt has been documented. Now comes execution. And if history teaches anything, it's that players fueled by doubt can become the most dangerous competitors of all. So the real question moving forward isn't whether he belongs. It's whether the league is ready for what happens if he proves he does. What do you think happens next? Does this become a redemption arc that reshapes perception? Or does it remain a polarizing debate? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this conversation alive. And if you're invested in watching how this story unfolds, every snap, every headline, every turning point, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who understands that sports are never just about sports. They're about power, perception, and proof.